Imagine waking up one morning and realizing you just paid a fortune for the Eiffel Tower. Sounds impossible, right? In 1925, one man convinced a wealthy businessman he had the legal authority to sell it, and somehow he got away with it. Not once, twice. His name was Victor Lustig, and to this day, many call him the greatest con artist who ever lived. He never carried a weapon, never raised his voice, never needed to. He had something far more dangerous than a gun: charm. But before he became a legend, he was just a clever, restless kid in a small Bohemian town, watching the adults around him and quietly taking notes. Lustig was born in 1890 in a town called Hostin, then part of Austria-Hungary, now the Czech Republic. He grew up in a respectable middle-class household. Nothing about his upbringing suggested the life that was coming, except for one thing. Even as a child, Lustig wandered the streets running small thefts and card tricks on local kids. Nothing serious, just enough to notice something important about himself. He was good at this. By his teenage years, he had already started inventing identities for himself, calling himself a baron, then a count, titles he had no legal right to, worn like they were tailored suits. At 19, he enrolled in college in Paris. He didn't last long. He preferred the card tables in Vienna to the classroom, and by 18, he was already running small-time gambling scams on wealthy travelers. One of his victims later described him to a detective magazine by saying he could make a deck of cards do anything except talk. He even picked up a scar on his face during this period, the result of an affair with the wrong woman and an extremely jealous boyfriend. It's a strange detail, but it tells you something. Even his mistakes had a kind of glamour to them. By his 20s, gambling small-time tourists wasn't enough anymore. Lustig wanted bigger stages, and he found one in the most unlikely place: ocean liners. In the early 20th century, transatlantic ships were floating palaces, packed with wealthy businessmen crossing between Europe and America with nothing to do but talk, drink, and show off. Lustig saw opportunity in every direction. He'd strike up friendships with rich travelers during the voyage, slowly, patiently. He never rushed it. Eventually, the conversation would drift to money, and Lustig would reluctantly admit, almost embarrassed, that his wealth came from something unusual: a machine. He called it the money box, a small wooden device that he claimed could duplicate any banknote fed into it. He'd demonstrate it, feed in a $100 bill, wait, and somehow 2 bills would come out the other side. It seemed impossible. It was impossible. The box was rigged. The extra bill was simply real currency Lustig had hidden inside beforehand. But to a wealthy passenger watching it happen with their own eyes, it looked like they'd just witnessed a financial miracle. By the end of the voyage, after carefully built suspense and competing buyers practically bidding against each other, Lustig would reluctantly sell the machine for $10,000, sometimes more. Once the buyer disembarked and actually tried using it themselves, nothing came out but blank paper. By then, Lustig was already gone. This was the pattern of his entire life: build trust, build desire, disappear before the truth caught up. But in 1925, Lustig set his sights on something far bigger than a wooden box. He was in Paris, reading a newspaper, when a small detail caught his eye. The Eiffel Tower was rusting, expensive to maintain. Some officials were even floating the idea of tearing it down completely. That's all Victor needed. An idea began to form, a ridiculous, audacious, brilliant idea. What if he sold it? Not the real tower, the idea of the tower, the illusion of authority over it. He forged government letterhead, fake stamps, fake signatures. Within days, he had documents that looked more official than the real thing. Then he did something almost insane. He invited France's top scrap metal dealers to a private meeting inside one of Paris's most luxurious hotels. There, posing as a senior government official, he delivered the secret. The Eiffel Tower had become a financial burden. The government had quietly decided to dismantle it and sell the metal. But it had to stay confidential. The public could never know, not until the deal was done. Every detail sold the lie: the documents, the hotel, the slow, deliberate way he spoke, like a man burdened by classified information. Nobody questioned it. One man in the room wanted this deal more than anyone else. His name was André Poisson, a businessman desperate to prove he belonged among France's elite. Victor saw that hunger immediately, and he used it like a weapon. He suggested, almost casually, that a personal gift to the right official could help things move faster. To Poisson, that didn't feel like a red flag. It felt like how business actually got done. So he paid around $20,000 up front, with another $50,000 promised once the contract was signed, for the tower that didn't exist, and for the bribe that sealed the deal. Victor disappeared with the money the same day, taking a train straight out of France. Here's the part that still feels unreal. Poisson never reported it, because how do you walk into a police station and say, "I bought the Eiffel Tower," and it turns out it wasn't for sale? Victor understood something most criminals never learn: shame is a better lock than any jail cell, and it kept his victim silent. Most people would have vanished after a heist like that, taken the win, disappeared into a new identity forever. Victor went back to Paris and ran the exact same scam again, just months later, with an entirely new group of scrap dealers. Unbelievably, it worked a second time. But this time, one buyer hesitated, started asking questions, went to the authorities. The story finally broke in the papers. Before police could close in, Victor was already on a ship to America. But his story wasn't finished, not even close, because the most dangerous con of his entire career was still ahead of him. In Chicago in the early 1930s, Victor Lustig set his sights on a man nobody in their right mind would try to scam: Al Capone. Lustig approached the most feared crime boss in America with a business proposition: give him $50,000 and in 60 days he'd double it. Capone studied him. Capone was not an easy man to fool, and he wasn't naive about money. But something about Lustig's calm, unshaken confidence made him agree. He handed over the cash, along with an unspoken warning about what would happen if this went wrong. Lustig took the money, and did absolutely nothing with it. He simply placed it in a safe and let it sit there for 2 months. Then, he returned to Capone with a defeated expression and admitted that the deal had collapsed. He was sorry, he'd failed. And then he placed the entire $50,000 back on the table, every single dollar. For a moment, Capone could have killed him right there for wasting his time. Instead, something unexpected happened. Capone was impressed. In a world full of men trying to steal from him, here was someone who'd had $50,000 in his hands and given it back untouched. Capone handed Lustig a reward. Some accounts say $1,000, others say $5,000. It didn't matter which, because that reward was the entire point of the con. Lustig never wanted to double Capone's money. He just needed an excuse to hold it, return it, and walk away looking like the most honest man Capone had ever met. He profited by appearing to lose. It might be the single most psychologically brilliant move of his entire career because it was a con built entirely on trust, aimed at one of the most dangerous men in the country, with absolutely zero room for error. Lustig once wrote down something close to his own personal code for con men. Be a patient listener, never look bored, never get visibly drunk, dress impeccably, and never, under any circumstance, boast about your own success. It reads less like a list of crimes and more like a manual for earning trust, which in the end was his actual specialty, not theft, trust. Eventually, Lustig moved deeper into counterfeiting, partnering with a chemist and an engraver to mass-produce fake currency that flooded American banks for years. At its peak, banks in New York were reportedly finding tens of thousands of dollars in counterfeit bills every single month. It was, ironically, the least glamorous of all his crimes that finally caught up with him. In 1935, federal agents who had been quietly tracking him for months finally closed in on a street in New York. He didn't run. He simply smiled and handed over his suitcase. Inside, authorities found counterfeit printing plates. He was eventually sentenced to 20 years and sent to one of the most feared prisons in the country, Alcatraz, the same prison holding Al Capone, the very man he'd once conned and somehow charmed at the same time. Even behind bars, his legend refused to fade quietly. Lustig died in prison in 1947 at the age of 57. On his official death certificate under occupation, it simply read apprentice salesman. Even in death, the truth about who he really was stayed exactly where he always kept it, hidden. Today, Victor Lustig is remembered as one of history's most audacious con artists. Not because he stole the most money, other criminals stole far more. He's remembered because of the sheer impossibility of what he convinced people to believe: that a tower could be sold, that a wooden box could print money, that returning stolen cash to a gangster was somehow the smartest move he ever made. Imagine having the confidence to sell one of the world's most famous landmarks, twice, and somehow walking away both times like nothing happened at all. If stories like this fascinate you, real scams, hidden truths, and the strangest moments in history, subscribe to Qorvix, because every story has a secret.